and I ordered the first super stock Plymouth Max Wedge car that he ever had. And I ordered that, a lightweight car, aluminum car. And when it came in, it was the end of the season. It had all the bonnets, it had everything, battery in the back, was a full-on car, super stock car, but it didn't have the aluminum front end. It had a steel hood and steel fenders on my aluminum car. And so we all tried to get that fixed, but they ran out of the aluminum, so they just made the thing in steel. Well, that's great, unless you want the motor. Hello. Okay. Sorry. I apologize. So I looked at National Dragster, and there was a gentleman by the name of Danny Capola. He was from the East, and he had just crashed his car, and it was an aluminum car. So I called my dealer, and I said, you need to buy that front end for our car because we need cold air and we need light fenders. So he bought this thing, and it sort of came in a suitcase, the whole front end. So we had to stretch it all out, and we ended up aluminum front end, and we went out and raced it. And in '64, we had an aluminum front end Hemi, and that did very well. We named it King Kong, and then still out of the Westbourne Chrysler dealership in Dearborn. And then in '65, we had the '65 car, and we raced that for the first quarter, went to Pomona with it, but it was an aluminum front end, and we altered wheelbase that car, and that was the end of my Mopar in the '60s. So thank you, and thanks for spending a minute with me.
You know, it's great to be here. Is it working? It's great to be here, and I was here about 3 years ago and told us I'll tell the same story. So I'm Butch Leal, and anyway, I'm Butch Leal, and I started in 1960. I was fortunate enough to be at the right spot at the right time. I'd race Chevrolets, I raced Fords, and I raced Chryslers. So I always say, you see the green, you start the machine. So, but I have favorites, and obviously the Chrysler cars were very good to me. And in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s, in the 80s, I started back with Pontiac, and it was a very enjoyable 10 years, and they were great. And the Chrysler cars were very good to me. I won a lot of national events, and I'm very proud of being in the International Hall of Fame, the Mopar Hall of Fame, and Superstock Hall of Fame. That was very nice. I really didn't believe it, but having all those cars and being at the right spot at the right time, and they were pretty darn fast. I loved it, and I worked very hard to make them run, build my own engines, and just like Paul did, actually. And you pick it right out of it and take the best out of it. I was pretty darn good with the 4-speed in a day, and then they came out with a Lenco and made everybody even. Then they came out with the reaction time, and that helped a lot of people to realize how late they were. And it kind of tuned everybody up, and I went, you know what? I stayed on top of it. People ask me all the time, how did you get so quick? And I said, I wasn't born with that. I said, I worked on the clutch linkage, I worked on the clutch, make it faster, and it made me look good. And you work on the car, put enough weight in the rear end, it's going to leave the starting line. So that's how I did that in my whole career, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful to be in here and enjoy every minute of it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Kramer, and Len Grimsley got a hold of me last year and said, we ought to do some sort of aluminum car display. I said, yeah, no, I don't think anybody's ever done that. So anyhow, that's what we put together over there over the last year. And then we put the motor display on over there for all the different neat motors and things like that. But I'm a historian, collector, no big racer. I was a guy hanging on the fence watching these guys and racing my little cars and stuff back then, Buckstown. But back in the 70s, I said, after I started making a little bit of money, I said, I'd like to have one of every factory race car that Chrysler made. And I've been working towards that pretty good. And I've got the Metal Flake 64 Dodge over there that was Strickler and Jenkins' car. I bought that in 1977, raced it till about 82, just bracket racing. And then life got in the way, but we do Mopar parts. We reproduce a lot of Mopar parts and just like to keep the history going. I collect a lot of literature and things like that, and I'm kind of a historian on this. So that's my story.
I'm Larry Short, and I'm the token Ford guy here. Jim didn't want to be prejudiced. He wanted to have somebody with Ford. I'm the president of the Thunderbolt Owners Association. We actually try to do the history on all these cars. And I'm a poor guy because when I was in high school, I read about all these guys in the magazines instead of doing my bookwork. I've raced all my life in different types of forms. My brother and I raced a Pro Stock motorcycle NHRA for about 5 years. We raced our Thunderbolts. I take my cars, I drive them on the street, I race them, I enjoy them. They're not restored cars, they're the way they come, and we enjoy the cars. Jim was nice enough to ask us to come here to tell why Ford kept beating the Dodges, but he wouldn't let me do that. So, and Butch, one of his most famous cars was a Thunderbolt he drove and did real well with.
But he learned.
Wow.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
My name is John Troxel, live in Allentown, PA. I started in the middle 60s with a 58 Chevy 9-passenger wagon, column shift, and a 348.
Wow.
So one day I wanted to go, I raced it all a couple of years on the 8th mile, then I'm going to go to the quarter. Well, I wouldn't make it down there. I ran out of power. So then I built a 56 Chevy sedan delivery, 225 horse with a 4-speed hydromatic. Did sort of okay at the end, and then they eliminated them sedan deliveries. So I put the body of a sedan on it with stick shift. And the first run, it was fine. Floored it, let the clutch, and the back end flipped up in the air. I forgot to take the line lock off. And from there, I built a 62 Plymouth 383 with Darrell Davis's help. He's from Division 2 at the time. And that car ran real well. And a 56 Chevy, I set a couple national records. And the Chrysler, the Plymouth car, did also. And then in Gainesville, 71, I got a deal from Oldsmobile. They wanted me to race with them, but I said no because my Plymouth was going good and the Oldsmobiles were flops. So why do I want to switch? But till the end of the race at Gainesville, I said I'll try one. So I ordered a 71 Vista Cruiser 9-passenger wagon with a 455.
Oh, cool.
So we finished it within a month. I got the car right away, of course. And then thick-headed, big-headed, we can make this run better than the others. Well, it was a good day. After the motor blew up on second gear, first run, so I got home from Suffolk, Virginia, and I said to my partner, help me take the hood off. What's 3 o'clock in the morning? Who cares? Help me get the hood off. Had it all apart within a couple hours and sort of figure everything out, put it back together. 2 weeks later, I went to Cayuga, I think it was Cayuga, Canada. Okay, you got it. And then I set the national record there and went to back it up, and the converter went. So I borrowed an Oldsmobile stock one, backed it up, and was runner-up. Then after that, I raced for them for 5 years. I had to quit. I had to go back to work.
And in '87, I bought the favorite car I always loved, a '68 Barracuda. It was Jim DeFrank's car, and it was running really good, but then I tinkered with it, made it come better, set 2 national records, and then I started 2 Chevys, a big block and a small block for super stock. And I think his name was Fred Smith, came to my garage to buy the Barracuda. I didn't know it was for sale, but it left with him. And the Chevys, I set national records, and in '93, I quit. That's the racing game. But I'm blessed to be here. I was blessed to set national records. I don't think my mind was set on winning races, just national records, because I did a whole bunch of them. So that's my thing.
All right, now, John, before you, just got sound on this one. How's that? Right here, right here, right here. There we go. John, you brought a car here though, so let's talk a minute about the car you got, and let's just talk a moment about the restoration / preservation of these race cars.
I brought a '63 Dodge Max Wedge with aluminum front end. And the only thing I did, I bought it about 37 years ago and brought it home. I bought it out of Don Garlick's museum, and thinking that it was totally restored. Well, it was, except for glue all over the place to hold stuff. So then I just went through it and had help from different people. And about 8 years ago, Greg Lane, I asked him to come to check my 2 cars. And the '63 Dodge had up to date 19 things wrong that should have been straightened out. But he said when it was restored many years ago, it was acceptable. So he helped me get most of the numbered parts. And the worst part was painting the bottom of the car. They came in primer with overspray. So that bugged me, and I finally did that. And that's about what we have with that. It was only on the street once, and fired up last week, and it didn't have brakes. The master cylinder leaked all the way into the cab, and of course we fixed it, so we get brakes. So it wasn't run that often. Because of the aluminum, number one, you take it out in the street, a stone hits it, now you got another dent. So I just left it there.
All right, I'm going to come over here to Jim for a minute. And Jim, again, you put this together, but all this aluminum stuff coming where people have tried to put these cars back together, that's not a simple task. Talk a little bit about your business and the aluminum parts, how hard it is to find aluminum parts to restore any of these older cars.
Well, originally in '63, for Dodge, they made 50 aluminum front ends. They were making 40 cars, and then they had 10 front ends for parts. And basically, if you wrecked your aluminum front end car, NHRA said put on steel if you can't find another aluminum piece. So they only built 50 sets for Plymouth, 50 sets for Dodge. So it's very hard to find, and it got damaged pretty easily. And back then, they were doing neutral starts, single master cylinders, 10-inch drum brakes. So there were some wrecks with those cars. So finding one today is getting pretty tough. We reproduce a lot of parts for Max Wedges and race Hemis, but the aluminum, no.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you give Butch the microphone? Now, Butch, what's interesting about your reality is when you ran a Z11, correct, in '63?
Correct.
So, and you also ran fiberglass in '64 and thin gauge steel in '65. So let's talk a little bit about what the treatment was on those Z11 cars with that aluminum nose.
Well, the Z11, as you know, they really were 348s with a stroker in it, and it ends up being a 409, and it ends up being a 427. Well, they had an Impala, which of all damn things, and heaviest car they could do, and put this Z11 together with aluminum front end, aluminum hood. And it was a nice car. Actually, I won promoted at limited production. I beat Tasca Ford in the final, so which is good. And it was good. Well, Chevrolet pulled the plug, okay, in the middle of the year because they sold 52% of the cars in the United States. So they didn't want to separate their corporation. So Bill Thomas told me that we're done, and he said, I don't really particularly like the guy. Mickey Thompson had Pontiacs with General Motors. Said he told me he flew to Dearborn and got a Ford deal. Call him. So I called him. I'm not bashful. And I got a Ford deal the next week. So I got 263s. This one's fiberglass front end, fiberglass hood. And I told him I need fiberglass doors. So, but anyway, I had fiberglass doors and got that handled, and I liked the Fords. And then obviously the next year was the Thunderbolts. It's all fiberglass, really a nice hot rod, and I ran very well with it. Can't remember when I got outran, and one Indy, crazy story. Remember, people out there, that the Indy 500 in '64, Mickey had the Indy 500 car. Well, Ford with a Ford engine. Well, it was a tub car and big tires, the first ones ever made, racing. Yep. So he told Davey McDonald, a friend of him, obviously, I worked with him every day, and little guy, would slow down, and he qualified. Well, he can't do that. He's like me. How are you going to slow down? Well, third or fourth lap, he hit the wall, killed him and three others. Well, Ford fired him. Fired Mickey right away. Wow. Here I am back here in the East Coast racing. It was okay, and I go to Ford, and they want to give me the car. I said, I don't want the car. He said, why don't you want the car? I said, well, it's actually Mickey's car, and I just drive it for me. I worked for him at that time. And he said, so he calls Mickey. He talks to him for a minute, and then he hands the phone to me. And he said, Mickey said, what the hell's going on? I said, they want to give me the car, and I don't want it. I'll never forget it. He said, that a boy. And I came back to California, and I won Indy. And right after that, the next race was in Detroit, and I went back to run it, won Indy, and then I asked the Ford people, what kind of deal do I have for next year? So we don't have one for you. My heart went to my stomach. And I went, what? I said, I sort of had a deal with Jack Christmas with the Camry and the Comet, and this fellow tapped me on the back. It was Mr. Cahill, Bob Cahill. He said, Butch, I'd like to speak to you outside here at the Winter's Banquet. He said, I'd like to speak to you. He said, I'm the head of Chrysler Racing. I said, I'll be right with you. And so I talked to him, and he wanted 4-speed drivers they had a lot of automatic drivers that were very good, but he needed some 4-speed drivers where they built a special vehicle, he told me. I said, well, what is it? He said, it's an altered wheelbase thing. And I said, what is that? So anyway, make a long story short, I got an altered wheelbase car, which was the first funny car. And it's interesting, Landy and I came, and we snuck a preview look at it. It was the ugliest damn thing I ever looked at. I said, what is this? All acid dip, sound like a beer can when you got in it. Boy, could it run, though. Yeah. And I loved the Hemi. First time I seen the Hemi with valve covers on it that wide, I went, whoa. But it liked me. I loved to work on that engine a lot. And I really ran fast, and that program went for quite a while. And I just love stories. I remember so much. I can remember that because it was money. Anyway, that's part of the story there, and I enjoy telling that story because Mickey treated me better than his own son, and it was really, really people. And I have the best. He had the best of the best working for him. Well, I picked every one of their brains. I'm 19 years old. I want to know everything they know. Then maybe I can even make it better. And that's how I accomplish what I have done, by working with the best. And it's been a wonderful journey in my life. I'm 80 now, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Very good.
Good for
Why don't we
you.
all right. Pass it down to Pat. So, Pat, again, before we step away from the Chevrolet side of this and talk a little more moped, that's okay. But you've got two aluminum front end Z11s over there, correct? And you've also got some engine type stuff over there. You've got a real background with the heritage on the Chevrolet racing situation. And you raced back in the day, correct?
Correct.
So were you involved in '63 when they pulled the plug on all that?
Funny you should say that, as Butch alluded to it. Yes, that was a devastating time, because here we are hooked up with the Chevrolet dealership. That was my livelihood, working there. And then we built a cadre of race cars, and then all of a sudden they unplug it. Well, it was tough for you. You could go somewhere else. I was stuck. Okay. I had nowhere to go. So, but it was a fun time. It was a good time, and it still continues. We've had great friends over the years, but we got caught up in the governmental affairs of saying that Chevrolet, you've got too big a market share. You're selling too many cars. Therefore, we're going to break up General Motors.
Correct.
And then we're going to separate all the divisions. And back then, you remember, everybody knows that you win on Sunday, you sell on Monday. And being in the dealership, I sold lots of cars on Monday after the weekend. But we also had all the nuances and problems you had to deal with a manufacturer that didn't want to go racing.
Right.
For instance, the 62, the black 62 I've got down there, the aluminum is 26 thousandths. That's
Wow.
feeler gauge size.
Yeah.
Then you look at the 63, it's 43 thousandths. Well, the reason is they learned their lesson. Don't make it out of too thin of aluminum. Dick Harrell raised holy hell about the first run that he made in his car with the aluminum front end. It came back and the tops of the fenders were all wrinkled. And he jumped on my buddy and said, "What did you do? I told you not to lean on the fenders." He said, "I didn't lean on it. You did it by racing it." It was your fault, not my fault.
Yeah, that was actually a problem with the aluminum cars. These early thin ones, if you put them out in the sun, they'd wrinkle from the sun, and you had to get them cooled down before they'd actually straighten back out.
And it doesn't cool down in Texas very well.
No, I'm sure they didn't.
So anyway, we had to make do with what we had. And yeah, we've got a 63 Z11 over there that this guy ordered brand new. And then I've got a mystery motor sitting on display over there that this guy helped me with.
It's pretty cool.
And there's only, I think we know of 10 running motors, mystery
Wow,
motors.
that's awesome.
And I don't know if we even know how many they made, maybe 29, somewhere in that range. I don't know exactly.
Now, does everybody know what the mystery motor is? That was the motor that Junior Johnson showed up with at Daytona in '63, and it was a shot across the bow, and that was the end of that, at least until 1965. So,
Well, they ended up, Butch is right, he said, talk about the mystery motor with 3 2s. Let me tell you what, these guys, the Skunk Works was alive and well, even though the bean counter said, don't do this, don't do this. Well, they tried everything under the sun. But this is when Chevrolet really got their undies in a knot. They went with a Holly carburetor. Was heresy from Ford Motor Company to put on. That's what they ended up with, and that's what's on this motor down here. And so everybody went nuts when that Holly carburetor showed up. But they tried everything with everything you can imagine. But what's interesting also is here they only made a handful of these motors, and my motor is different than Doug's motor. The water pump on his is different. The balancer is different. So they kept creating different variations of parts all the way through. And that's how they got started in '61, very late, with doing the 142 409s. And then they built 10 409s with 2 4-barrel carburetors right at the very end. And I'm lucky enough to have one of those. But then came '62, about every month or 2 months they'd come out with some new part. They call
Right.
it a special service package part.
And here was the problem there. NHRA trying to maintain parity. There was constant fluidity in the rules. That's why you have some cars down there are marked SSS. There are some cars that are marked FX. Some cars are the limited production was Z11s in 1963 at Pomona, one race. But because of this continual desire to keep things equal, you know, they were changing the rules, and of course the factories were saying, well, wait a minute, we can go faster, and every couple of months they'd find something else that might have made them go quicker, and then you had to file paperwork with Farmer Dismuke in North Hollywood, and he'd say yes or no, and that was the way that went. But it got very complicated, I would agree.
And it got very contentious because Farmer would issue a letter about the Z11. Here it is in writing. It's okay to run it as super stock. And then you show up with the car. Oh no, that's AFX.
Who was your guy?
Wait a minute.
Who was your guy in Division? Was it Zimmerman and your guy? Was he your guy in Division 5 then? Who was your tech director down there?
I think that Zimmerman.
It
said
was
right.
Zimmerman. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
But anyway, the rules changed. The people changed. And sometimes the tracks were different. It's how they interpreted your car.
Right.
I don't like the looks of this, so therefore you're going to be at BFX or something.
That's right. Well, let's run the microphone back down here to Larry for a minute.
I got to tell something about that
Oh,
story.
Butch, stop the. Everybody want to hear Butch right now? All right, they want to hear you.
You're not going to believe this. Listen to the story, you'll understand it. And I was 61, we're talking about the 409. That's sort of my heart. Nicholson shows up at Indy with the 2 4-barrels. And on top of that, he had Enderley injected on the hood, ejector scoop on the hood, and won the Eliminator, won everything. Am I right? Yeah, I remember that like I didn't happen to have a 61. I had a 62. Yes, he did, 2 4-barrels. And that was the start of the next year was 62, as you said, they were 2 4-barrels. Well, I personally looked at everything, and I love the Bel Air bubble top. But I looked at the Biscayne was 100 pounds lighter. It's a lot uglier, but you know I like the 100 pounds. You can't outrun a feather. You just absolutely can't outrun a feather. And I was very fortunate and got everything right, and I outran Nicholson, so that felt pretty darn good about that.
Yeah.
So, Larry, you're our Ford guy. Here's what I thought was interesting. One of the cars Jim has down there is an aluminum front-end Galaxy. So, do you know much about why Ford went from the aluminum to the fiberglass? Was there a general reason for that? Was it just cheaper, or?
Yeah, the price of the car was a lot cheaper. It's just like they started cars, they painted them all white. And the reason that was, you could take a white car and paint colors on it easier than if you had a burgundy car.
Right.
You know, listen to these Dodge guys and Chevy guys. They never lost a race.
You got to put that closer. You want to start a fight, you got to put that a little closer.
I said those Chevy guys and Dodge guys, you hear them, they never lost a race. They never, man, I used to read in the magazines, I'd see that Ford beating that Chevy, but I guess that was lies. Now, you know, one of the stories when they were developing the Thunderbolt, Dick Brandon was testing it, and the Thunderbolt's got clips on the back windows. And the reason was he made it pass down the strip, and he when the window down, it blew the back window out because they were plexiglass windows. So the first batch, they put clips on the windows to keep them from blowing out. And then later on, they found out that they had to have a full tank of gas to make weight after they make a run. So what they started doing was putting those glass windows back in the second batch of cars so they'd make weight, and then they didn't have to use the clips. But I really do, I can remember just reading about all these guys in the magazines. I met a bunch of them over the years. I know Don and Arnie Beswick and all of them. And when you meet them, it's like, man, it's God, you know. These guys really did a lot for their day, and all we're trying to do is preserve what they did and carry their legacy on.
Absolutely. We'll pass the mic down there to Paul.
Oh, by the way, Larry, did the doors have clips on them so when they raced the Mopar, wouldn't blow the doors?
All right. Well, Paul Rossi was, again, I mean, these guys are, you know, we're all a little longer in the tooth when we unswerve, but Paul was actually a pretty cool kid in Detroit at the time you were racing. And you ended up just like Butch with some factory stuff, you know, in terms of having some support and being able to talk to people. Is that correct?
Yeah, Detroit, if you were a racer in Detroit, you had the Ram Chargers, you had the Golden Commandos, you had Dick Branister, Color Me Gone car, you had Dick Housey, Teddy Spihar. So Detroit, if you wanted to get a deal, there was very few crumbs on the table left over after they fed all those cars. So I eventually, in 1965, got an offer from Lincoln and Mercury to run their AFX Comet, which I did do because I got a salary and I got a car and all the parts. And in Detroit, that was hard to find.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Well, guys, we've got about 20 minutes left, and we'd like to take a few questions. If you can give us stuff that you think these guys would like to talk about, that'd be great.
I told this young gentleman here he wanted to ask me a couple of questions.
That young gentleman there, this is Ron McHugh, former NHRA.
He did, so I'd like to speak to him.
First of all, my wife would dispute the gentleman's characterization.
Thank you.
Butch, speaking of how hard you had to work on the cars and confront situations on the run, you were running a Pocono Drag Lodge up near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And you had a match race against Malcolm Durham. And your front end broke. And you went out into the parking lot, found another fair lane, pulled the idler arm off of it.
Now, you know, a drag racer would never do something like that.
You know I'm not going to ever say anything about that.
You know,
Now, come
yeah,
on, that's not a good
The
question.
statute of limitations might have run out, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have offspring.
Come on now.
But I heard you put it back.
You know what? I just, I enjoy all these stories. They get better every time, actually. But, we were talking about the Thunderbolt. I got to tell you a quick story about that with Dick Brannon. I got the Thunderbolt, and I was going to Indy, and I said, "Can I stop? And I need to work on the car before I go to Indy." I took slicks off of it, put 7-inch tires on it. So at the dealership, I went down. I couldn't do it. I pulled the gas tank out, and I put a 150-pound pig in the back, lead pig, and I couldn't lift it up. So I called Dick. He was going to race the AFX Falcon. And and it's also his Thunderbolt. Well, he came down with a mechanic and he helped me put the gas tank up. He said, "I think I'll leave the Thunderbolt home."
That wasn't 64, Butch?
1964.
Now, was that after the $1 a foot race in Detroit?
Yeah, well, Detroit, and then we went to Indianapolis.
Now that was a time, Larry, when, if I remember right, you know, Dino Don Nicholson claimed he had gotten robbed because the Golden Commandos won that event. Was that true?
Oh, wait, you got to remember one thing. I'm pretty prejudiced when it comes to Dino Don. Don Nicholson was my hero growing up. He was older and the Chevy guy, and when I started, and he took me under his arms, and I will say, he was probably the best chassis man I ever seen in my life. He was the first guy to carry the front end would carry, and he had he knew everything. So I got acquainted with him, and he loved me as a kid. And,
I appreciate
and it didn't help hurt me any when I went out with his daughter in the day. And so we got real good friends, and I learned a lot from Dino. But the only thing I can say about him today is that between him and I, he'd just throw it together, and he'd wreck a car just because he did it. And I loved him. I said, "Pay attention what the hell you're doing." I couldn't get it in his mind, but he thrashed, him and Earl Wade, flapping his arms and throwing all night long. And I went, "Hey, take your time, But I love Dino, and of course he had the same program as I think Chevrolet, Ford. I don't think he ever ran a Chrysler that I know of, but he should have. And
he did pretty good with that. In Larry's defense,
right.
I would
Anyway,
say Nicholson did pretty good with the Ford stuff.
Is there any other question you'd like me to answer? I'm not going to answer the first one, so go right ahead.
You're gonna give him a gimme.
You should be in politics.
Mickey Thompson?
No, I said you should be in politics. You don't want to run it.
You should be in politics.
I know I'm getting ready, but I'm a total Democrat. I'm in the wrong place. So, I lied about that. I'm a Republican.
Good
Man, you
deal.
want to start
I
a
got
fight.
red, but
And there I thought I had something to drink with.
yeah, I told a joke. Remember the last joke I told Jeb? I said my grandson 3 years ago came. It was 0 out. And he says to me, he says, he got here late, right? And he says, Grandpa, he just came up from Indianapolis. He said, Grandpa, it's so damn cold here in Chicago. He said, even the Democrats got their own hands in their own pockets.
Wow.
I thought that was great.
That's good.
Well, I think we're very fortunate. People have patience, and I think the president's going to straighten this place up. I hope.
Yes.
We need a lot of help, and we need to help him.
Amen to that.
He don't want me. He talk about me in politics. He don't want me there because I'd end it real fast.
Jeff, but
Go ahead, Pat.
I need to expound on something that Butch said about Don Nicholson. He was an incredible chassis guy. Here's a following example. In his 62 that he ran and did very, very well with, he lightened the frame incredibly so, because he heard about the old Swiss cheese Pontiacs, so he lightened the frame of the X-frame on that 62. He sells it to a guy, and the guy on his first burnout did a real hard burnout, jumped on the brakes, stopped, and something was wrong. He got out and looked, and the left front tire was 2 inches off of the ground. The frame had collapsed. Great setup, for sure.
But you had to know how to do it. All right, Ron, you got to give the microphone up. Does anybody else have questions?
Jeff, just with your indulgence, a real
Here,
quick
hey,
one.
someone grab his microphone.
He knows me better.
Any other questions? Going once? There, we got one.
Talking about Dino Don, I'm a little young, but I followed him from Pro Stock, but then I read nostalgia about him in the 60s. Anyway, when he died, Hemmings Motor News, a guy that had a paragraph in the Corvette section almost every month, wrote a bit of an obituary about him, how good of a fuel injection tune-up he put on like a 61 or 62 Corvette. And when he ran it in NHRA, they got after him because it was so quick, because of Dino Don's tune. I wondered if you know anything about that.
Hold on a minute. Someone give Butch the microphone there.
Dino did a real good tune-up. It was Bill Thomas in Bill Thomas's shop. They cut the fuel injector in two and ported it and welded it back together and made it look stock, and it was really a good tune-up.
That's a good story there.
By the way, speaking
I
of
did the
fuel,
same thing in 62.
I remember a meetup I had with Don Nicholson. We were at the 64 pre-nationals meet at Muncie, Indiana.
okay.
And I was waiting to go into service, and I had sold the Z11. And a friend of mine had built well, first of all, I was out in California, and I go into this gas station, and there's a guy who had an F-stock 348. And on the wall was a picture of a friend of mine back from Buffalo who had the F-stock record, a 56 Chevy. And I said, oh, I know that guy. And he says, well, there's a better guy now. There's this guy back in Buffalo, Ted Hartman, who has this nine-passenger fuel-injected station wagon. So I told him I was going to go back to Buffalo and I'd find out how fast that car was. Well, I go back to see Ted, and he says, hey, how'd you like to drive this thing? I said, fine, until I get my orders. So I called the guy out in California and said, yeah, it's pretty fast, and I'm going to see you at the Nationals. Well, anyway, we go to the pre-Nationals meet at Muncie, Indiana, and we won it in stock. 9-passenger yellow station wagon, fuel-injected, 283, 4-speed. They allowed you to use the 4-speed back then in the 57. And we won that, and Nicholson was parked straight behind us, and he spent more time looking over that fuel injection unit that we had that he was spending on his own car. So he was, and I think early, didn't he have a BFX 62
Yes.
Nova with a fuel
He did.
injection?
Yes, he did.
He did.
It's true.
Yeah, he did.
Well, I wanna tell you one thing that's going on here this weekend. If you don't know, over in the Mecum booth, there is a '56 Nomad. Looks a little average. That car has got the second GM fuel injection unit built. It was delivered to Nally Chevrolet with 2 black 57s that were going to Smokey Unic to race on the sand, and the 2 black and white 57 150s that were the Black Widow cars. And that car is actually a GM show car. It was built in Los Angeles, shipped to Nally Chevrolet, prepped for the show, did New York, Detroit, Chicago, LA, was sold in LA, and was owned by a lifelong Navy guy who was a radio operator. And that car has just been restored. And it's here. So if you want to check out some great Chevrolet history, very early Corvette block in that vehicle as well.
Hey, Jeff, I just want to say a couple things. One thing, back to Dino, I think he's the only guy that ran everything. He ran gasoline, he ran alcohol, he ran nitro, he ran hydrazine, which was rocket fuel. He ran stock, super stock, pro stock. He ran funny cars. I mean,
And this
he
was
did
after
everything.
getting out of modified sprint cars because all his friends were getting killed. That was where that's how Dino Don ended up as a drag racer.
So, yeah. Well, yeah, all those parts flying around. But and another thing, too, I just wanted to mention that the Strickler car on the end of our display there, that was the second Hemi car built. They built 4 64 AFX cars, 2 Dodges and 2 Plymouths. The first one was the Ram Chargers car. That was the second one. They had the Golden Commandos and the Melrose Missile cars. Melrose Missile. And Mike owns the Ram Chargers car and the Strickler car. So he owns the first and second Hemi cars. And then the Golden Commandos car, which ended up the Lawman car, that was Al Extrans. He was an attorney at Chrysler, and he made a deal, and he ended up with the Golden Commandos car. They got pissed off, so 2 weeks later, they built a hardtop that I think won the Detroit meet.
It did, $1 a foot. That's what I was
So
talking
that was the
about.
5th Hemi car built. Mike owns that car, too.
Right. So
Just wanted to throw that out there. And I think Larry should mention what the 63 Galaxies, they look pretty stock, but they're really trick.
okay,
I
well,
think
go
you should-
ahead, Larry. Why don't you finish this up with a little bit of Ford history?
Boy, they're beating on me. I tell you what, Ford was always trying to catch up. There's no two ways about it. You know, their cars were too heavy. The Galaxies were heavy. The Galaxies were too heavy a car. The transmissions, they run a Lincoln automatic in the Thunderbolts, and it just wouldn't hold up. The guys would buy the cars, and the first thing to do is take the automatics out and put sticks in them. But we've all enjoyed it. I mean, if it wasn't for all these cars and all these guys, where would we be today?
And one more thing, Mopar guys, if it wasn't for Ford, you wouldn't have a Dana rear end.
That's right. And
That was a truck part.
There you go. That made them all quiet, didn't it?
I'll tell you a story. You're talking about the at Indy with the Thunderbolt. My wife just had our first child, and I got to get home to California, so I'm passing out cigarettes. There are 52 cars. I'm handing out cigars to everybody.
They were cigars. When he said passing out cigarettes, like, man, he was broke.
Well, I gotta go. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get to the front where that Dodge was. Well, Strickler had the Dodge, and he was a little faster than we were. Jenkins and Strickler, and I went, I want him. I said, I wanted to go get the hell home. I had to go home. And so URC is like parting the sea. Everybody went this way and that way, and I just pulled up beside him. He seen me. He pulled to the front. I went to the side, pulled to the front. He red lights. I went, bang. The only problem was I broke.
You're not going home.
Yeah, I'm not going home right now, but I broke the input shaft right at the clutch disc. And I'm coasting. This is how the good Lord works miracle. I coast down, make the turn, and I look over. You know how they race midgets at Indianapolis? This new Ford pickup had the bumper on it. He pushed me all the way back to the pits. At that time, H.L. Shahan, which is my buddy, he helped me a lot in racing earlier. I said, go to my truck, get a 4-speed. And I had some tools. I was pulling it out, and 15 minutes later, I had a new 4-speed in it. And I grabbed a hold of it. You know how stiff they were, the new Borg Warner, I think it was. And I'm going. He looked at me and he says, when you let the clutch out, you won't know it. And I'll be darned if I didn't win the race. I went, wow, that was pretty wonderful. That's how lucky I was, and the Lord blessed me.
And again, to Larry's point, the Mopar guys had the other 15 spots in the 16-car field. Seeing that car win that round was not making the other guys very happy.
Well, I got to tell you, let's back that up. When I went to the Chrysler, 10 days before Indy, I had the all wheelbase car, and they asked me to get this super stocker out of Tennessee, in which I had a stock, legal super stock motors, my spare. And so I did, went to Tennessee, picked it up, brought it back to Sox and Martin's, painted it and everything, and in like 4 or 5 days, got Doug semi-headers. I go, I'll be darned if I didn't win Indy again with a Chrysler. That was just like, holy mackerel, back to back. But that was kind of interesting. Now I got 2 cars. There wasn't enough mustard in California for me to cover me up at that time.
Well, guys, the boys are about to rock. We'll be here at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. These are the lightweights and the heavyweights.